Hey guys, my name is Callum, also known as Northern Dice, and today I'm going to be giving you a review of Rescuing Robin Hood by Castillo Games. This is a 1 to 5 player cooperative card game centred around rescuing Robin Hood. The idea is that you and your merry men are trying to save him from the Sheriff of Nottingham by rescuing other villagers with better abilities and stats in order to be able to finally siege Nottingham Castle, take out the guards guarding Robin Hood, and, should you so choose, take out the Sheriff himself. This copy was sent to us by Castillo Games for the purpose of unbiased review. All opinions given are our own on this one, and we are not paid for any content produced. Here I've set up Rescuing Robin Hood for a 2-player game. The game is quite the table hog, to the point where I've had to completely adjust what I'm comfortable with from my camera angles, but you know, new things are always scary. Either way, the idea behind it is that it's entirely cooperative in both its premise and its outcome, and it relies heavily on player communication. Both these two players will need to work together at all times, making sure they know who's doing what their plan is, and how they're going to achieve it. You do need to make sure there's a nice balance of what each player is able to do, because if you are able to get to a position where you cannot achieve a goal, it's not down to the final player's inability, it'll be down to the decisions made throughout. So on the table we've got the actual player boards and the 4 skills that are associated to each one, alongside a band leader for each from Robin Hood's Merry Men, and 8 default starting cards per player. Now, the default cards aren't overly great, but they're handy in a pinch in terms of what they can do, and they should give you a nice spread of actions to start off with. The game on this one is set up for 2 players specifically, which means that we are playing with the 2-player setup, which are the cards just there. You do have 3-player, 4-player and 5-player setup, and of course the actual number of guards and things you'll need to do will increase, but every player still only starts with 8 starting regular villagers, which come like this. And they have very, very basic starting attributes. So, as you can see here, they have the 4 attributes same as players, and what the players do is they will shuffle, deal 4, and that will be for day 1. The other ones will be ready for day 2. And the game almost cycles in day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and then you've got your day 5 at the end. And what happens is, on day 1, all players will reveal the cards they have and adjust their scores on their boards accordingly. So, an example for this one, the player playing as Lady Christabel will increase her wit to 5, her stealth to 4, her brawn to 4, and her jolliness to 1, because he gives you a negative 1. They'll also gain some tokens from these 3 characters, and you'll gain a scouting, a prayer, and a cookery. And we'll come on to those in a second, but they're always handy in a pinch, but are used by players before an attack is made. The actual band leader themselves also has an attribute, which is a constant thing for them, and when they have a weaker attribute for a character, they'll always be able to do something unique. So an example here, Lady Christabel is able to... when Lady Christabel uses cookery or mead, you get +1 to the increase in attribute, so it makes her cookery tokens that little bit more powerful. So if we move to Lady Christabel's actual board, we can then start to change those attributes across. So in terms of wit, we would get 5. We track it on there by moving the ones, the units, across to that point. When we exceed 9, of course, we'll change it on the 10s. In terms of stealth, we get 4 from our band, but from Lady Christabel herself, we get an extra 3. 1, 2, 3, so that gives us a nice tasty 7. Brawn, we get 5. And jolliness, as we said, we get 1. But we also get those unique tokens as well. And those are really handy in terms of what they can do, because they become very, very useful in a pinch. Scouting and prayer do not carry over to the next round, whereas cooking does, but it will change its actual focus. So our prayer will allow us to... 1 prayer will let us move a guard to a different run, whereas 2 prayer will let us remove a guard. Scouting allows us to flip to unknown guards, and cooking lets us increase any one value by 2. And of course, if we don't use it that round, we will flip it over and it will become mead, which carries over, and then that will be able to increase any value by 1. So it's one that you can actually save if you don't need to use it at that time. The aim of the game is to take out runs of guards, And in order to do so, you need to set up based on what the actual day dictates based on player setup. I've now set the run of guards up based on what our day 2 says, and for day 2 for us on this one we have 2 runs. We have a silver prisoner being guarded by 5, a bronze prisoner being guarded by 3 in one run, and our second run is a bronze and a silver being guarded by 8. And the only way you can rescue prisoners is by removing all the guards who are guarding them. And the more guards there are, the more valuable the prisoners will be. But of course that's also random selection because you are working from a large deck of possible characters, all of who have very different unique attributes. So an example here, Walter Webb is wit, stealth and brawn, whereas Hughes on first is 6 stealth and 1 jolliness. So it'll very much depend on what you need based on who you want to get, but these are the ones we've been dealt and these are the ones we'll need to deal with. Every single run will always contain your first guard face up and every other guard face down, and these attributes on the blue guards could be anything from 1 to 6. They never have jolliness because that's an attribute you can use to change the value of attributes, but with these fellas they will always have some wit, some stealth and some brawn, and that's how susceptible they are to it. So the higher the number, the stronger they are. And what you need to do is, as a player, make 2 attacks using 2 different attributes to try and take as many of these guys out. And the way these attributes work is really, really different for each one. Wit is on a basis of pushing your luck. So you might say, I have got, as example for Lady Christabel, as we remember, 5 wit. She knows full well that she can definitely take out that guard, or she could take out that guard, or she could just take out that one. If she were to then try and push her luck, she could then flip over the next card, and if it's still equal to or under her wit's value, she would also be able to outwit those guards. And the idea is that you want to push it as far as you can without being over your wit's amount. Because if you are, your wit fails, they see through your cunning plan, and they are all face up so you can see them, but it means your attack fails and no guards are removed. Stealth works on a basis of choosing random guards to attack. Now, you can use things like scouting to flip over cards to see what they are, or you can just go really, really ham and gamble. And with Lady Christabel having 7 stealth, she could say, I can definitely take out him, and I'm feeling quite confident, so I'm also going to go for him and him. When the attack has been decided, they'll be flipped, and if the stealth value is equal to or less than her stealth value, she will succeed, take them out. If it exceeds, then none of them are taken out. Brawn, on the other hand, is an all or nothing attack. You take all your brawn and you just go through every single one, and if you exceed their max value, you beat them all. If you don't exceed their max value, nothing happens, they're all just flipped over to the point where you realise that you have been outmatched in terms of brawn. So just to run an example turn as Lady Christabel, what we're going to choose to do is we're going to choose to start by using our scout token, which lets us flip over 2 guards. And I think it would make most sense to identify what these guards have got in store for us. And we have got this as our max values, which means that these guards are running on 6 wit, 9 stealth and 9 brawn, which exceeds all of Lady Christabel's stats. So what she's also going to choose to do is to try and get that extra bit of stealth. She's going to spend her food token, which allows her to increase any attribute by 2, so we'll increase her stealth by 2. But Lady Christabel's ability also lets us increase it by an extra 1, so she will actually have 10 stealth. That now allows her to be confident to say, I can take out 1, 2, 3 guards. And when she does, these guys get removed. They've been defeated, they run back off to Nottingham Castle, and so Render is saved, and he can now run back to the Big Oak, ready for the end of day 2 when we're able to add him into our stacks. We're still able to do one more attack, and because we've now used all of our stealth basically, and we aren't able to use the same attribute twice, Lady Christabel is going to need to be quite clever. So what she's going to choose to do is try and use her wits, but she can easily see there's going to be a problem. Some of these guards might be quite clever, so she's going to spend 1 prayer token to move one of these guys to here. He'll get flipped up because then he's at the end of the row. I think that's quite a wise move. She'll then use this one to move another one. She'll move him to there. She could have easily just said, I'm going to use 2 to get rid of 1, but then it would have been a complete gamble in terms of what she got rid of. So she is running with 5 wit. She can use her 1 jolliness token, her 1 jolliness attribute to increase that to 6, and try and outwit these guards. So she's definitely going to outwit this one. She's going to continue to push her luck, and then she tries to outwit this one, which is now a total of 3. As long as this one is 3 or less, we have won. So she's going to push the luck a bit further, and it's a 4, which means that her attack fails. So these 3 guards stay, her attribute is reduced back down to 0, and it is the end of her turn. But that doesn't mean that her turn does not affect Maid Marian's turn at all. So what will happen is Maid Marian will gain the actual attributes from Brawn and from Jolliness that aren't spent by Lady Christabel. So Lady Christabel still had 5 Brawn, which means that that is passed on to Maid Marian. And Maid Marian has got a whopping 16 Brawn now, alongside a very, very confident 5 Wit, 5 Stealth, and 5 Jolliness. So she's doing very well for herself, but she doesn't actually have a special ability, so all of the things that she can do are very bare bones in terms of that. But she does have a cookery token, so she could use that if needs be, but she might save that. She needs to try and take out all of these ones now, and she needs to do it in a way that will enable her to be able to use what she's got left in other attributes to be able to also tackle these ones. So what I'm going to suggest to her is that she uses her cookery token to increase her wit by 2 to get to 7, which will match those, and she can use her first attack as a confident wit to get 4, 5, 6, 7, match or exceed their value, remove them, and the little girl that they were for some reason guarding can now run to the big grey oak, and we are able to very confidently say we have saved her. Now we're in a position where we can, I can move this up so you can see actually. We can try and brawn our way through this. But because none of the attributes will get carried over to the next round, it makes sense to just do all or nothing in a real all or nothing style. So we're going to spend all 5 of our jolliness to increase that to 21. And just hope that we can exceed 21. But it's already not looking great because we've got 12, 15 as a start. So our all or nothing attack needs to exceed that. So they need very low numbers. So we've got 6, 12, 15, 19, 20, 21, that matches, 26, so they exceed. And what happens is, the day would finish with those guys being undefeated, and these two, rather than going to the Great Oak, they would be sent to Nottingham Castle. And any characters that are not saved and do end up in Nottingham Castle actually increase the strength of the sheriff himself in the final battle. So we end day 1 with some characters going off to the Great Oak, ready to be saved and added to our hands at the end of day 2. Some folk ending up in Nottingham Castle because we failed to save them, and we're now ready to set up for day 2. And what happens is our characters that we had are now exhausted, and we use the remaining 4 that we had in our hand. You can only ever have 8 cards. And what happens is, once we've completed day 2, Lady Christabel and Maid Marian will take turns to choose characters from the Great Oak to add to their hand and replace them with the other ones. Any characters that are removed from your hands go to Sherwood Forest as saved, and they can give you bonuses at the end of the game if you manage to defeat the castle itself. And what happens is, as you progressively get through day 2, same setup, get new characters. Day 3, new setup, save, some say go to Nottingham Castle. Day 4 is the exact same, with at the end you getting new characters. Day 5 is different, because you only have 4 characters and you can choose them completely. You can choose who goes first, but the difference is your setup looks a bit different. Where day 2 has prisoners to save, and day 3 and 4 also have prisoners to save, day 5 looks a bit like this, and that's because you have Nottingham Castle to get through, plus 6 red guards. You then go to here with 8 red guards. If you defeat those, you save Robin Hood, and the game is effectively won. But for that bonus round and that sweet little bit of justice at the end, you can then push it that bit further to defeat another 5 guards and the sheriff himself. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that all these days have unique abilities and unique effects. So day 1 and 2, we should have gained 3 brawn per band leader. Day 3 and 4, we would gain any remaining stealth be passed on as well, not just brawn and jolliness. And day 5, all band leaders will gain +2 brawn for each cookery token they spend on the turn. And we always find it's better to look at that information before starting the game so we know how our battle plan is going to go, and that if we need to try and save as many of these cookery tokens as we can, then we have got that scope to do so. Just to give you an idea of how the actual scaling works, so here's a 2-player setup for day 1 and 2 where you've got a straightforward bronze, silver, gold with increasing number of cards. I flip that and have a look at a 3-player setup. You've now got more prisoners, because you've got more players to contend with to try and share the prisoners around, but also increased numbers of soldiers. Whereas if I go for a 4-player setup here, you can easily see the increasing numbers going a little bit more wild, and day 5, a 5-player, you've got so much more to contend with. So communication becomes more key the more players there are. And that is simply on that basis of it being a day 1 and 2. If we were to look at a day 5 for a 4-player, you've got more than enough soldiers to be contending with. Let's see if we can find a day 5. Yeah, player 5, day 5. Again, you are looking at 28 soldiers just to get Robin Hood, and then a further 17 plus the sheriff to win the bonus quest, with no bonuses given. The scaling does make sense, and it does actually work within what it's meant to be. It is just that basis that you've got to remember, the less players there are, the more responsibility they hold, whereas the more players there are, the more shared responsibility and therefore the more communication. At the end, if you've rescued Robin Hood, you've won as a default. If you manage to defeat the Sheriff of Nottingham as well, you have extra won, as it would be. There are also challenge cards, which do increase difficulty further. Again, those aren't a necessary part of the actual game, but they give points if you are willing to look at that, and they do give that extra bit of challenge. But I tell you, they are sinister in what they can do, from changing all overall attribute values to reducing the effectiveness of tokens, to just saying that every single band leader has now -3 stealth. It can be a real spanner in the works, but it does give you that extra bit of challenge, and it is possible with the right amount of communication. Rescuing Robin Hood is a game that I previewed previously before its Kickstarter fulfillment, and my opinions for it were quite high. I was quite the fan of it. I like the idea of it being cooperative, but you've got to manage not only how much you can do, but how much other people can do in terms of how your different stats can pass on and the different elements within it. And in all honesty, the game is very, very similar to that preview copy that I received, apart from that production quality difference, because, well, as you'd expect with any Kickstarter, there is always that element of polish and that finalisation with any sort of finished product. Saying that, I'm still going to go through the whole shebang of my thoughts and everything, and this should realistically correlate with what I said in my preview. If you do want to check the preview just to, I don't know, nitpick and see what I said different, it is available on the blog as a written review. This one, of course, will be videoed. So, in terms of gameplay, I really enjoy the actual cooperative element, as I've already previously mentioned. I like the fact that you are working as a team to rescue Robin Hood. I like the way that you have to manage not only what you can do, but what other people will be able to do as well. And communication is really the aim of the game throughout. It's rare to play a game that is so heavily dependent on not only what you can do, but making sure other people can as well. To the point where in higher player counts, you will find yourself choosing to do less to be able to enable people to do more. It always feels at the start like you are up against the odds though. Even at a 2-player count, you have got 8 guards for 1 villager, and 8 guards is a lot. And if all the cards fall against you in terms of one stat, you may end up with a grand amount of going on +30, +40 in terms of a number to beat. And with your initial villagers, or even the 3rd and 4th day villagers, it can feel impossible. But it's remembering that choosing which stat to use will determine how well you can manage as a team. I am very brute force. I will always try and go for the whole shebang, take them all out in one hit, and it doesn't work in this game. It is one where you've actually got to be incredibly tactical and consider how you're going to take out certain ones, which ones you know you can move, who can move what, where, who can use their tokens to give them the edge. And I think that works really well in its favour as well. Where the cooperation falls is where all cooperative games fall, and that is in the element of alpha gamering, if you will, or quarterbacking, as some people call it, which is where you have one player who seems to take the lead and controls every element, and it sometimes comes to a point in some games where they will completely control every single element within. Almost where they might as well just be playing 5 hands to themselves. With that, we found it best, if there is that element, to keep your cards private. And I know in a cooperative game that can seem quite trivial, but it does give you that element of who can do what, and it also encourages that communication. There is no glory in being that player who takes out the most, because you realistically do need to share all those cards equally across you, especially those higher level villagers, because if you've got them all in hand, at the end you can only have 4 villagers for the final siege, and you may then be sacrificing some really good cards because you didn't distribute them equally. We also find it quite helpful to just make sure that everything is either as transparent as possible or as not transparent as possible. If you're playing with newer players, you'll want to play hands open so everyone can see what everyone's got. You can sort of liaise, you can talk, you can delegate, and you can share who's going to take on what role and who's going to do what work. When you're playing with some real hardcore gamers who will know exactly what they're doing and do have a big plan in their head, rather than having someone take the lead or having people clash, just keep hands private and just say, if I'm able to lend you this strength, are you able to do this? No? Well, I'll be able to pass it on to this 3rd person or to this 4th person, and it should balance itself out. I do need to emphasise the fact that all cooperative games do have that alpha gamer risk, and it comes with the territory of cooperative games. It isn't to the detriment of Rescuing Robin Hood. I think as a cooperative game, it is superb. But I do think it is that if you're not one for cooperation because of that element, it is something to err on the side of caution with. In terms of how hard and complex the game is, the game's not overly complex. I think it's more getting used to the routine, knowing how things fall into place and how things flow. You need to remember there are little, not hitches, but things that you need to remember, like you can only use your tokens before your attack, because if you get halfway through an attack, realise you need another 2 strength, but you've got a cooking token that you could have used, it is supposed to be played beforehand. And I guess that's the risk with it. You are gambling on the whole, I'm going to either reveal these or I'm going to use them. You can't just, in the middle of someone else's turn, say, haha, don't panic, I'm going to reveal these cards. Your turn's done, and you need to take a step back. And that is, again, in that learning curve of how the game works. In terms of the actual difficulty, I think the scaling works really well. One player, solo player, is not easy. I've rescued Robin Hood multitudes of times, but I have never, as a solo game, managed to take out the Sheriff of Nottingham. He is just hardcore. And the fact that he gains stats for every single prisoner that he manages to keep is just mad. But it keeps it fun, and it keeps me coming back to it. At 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, we've never had an issue. It seems to just flow beautifully. As long as you play your cards correctly, manage to balance things out, share things equally and communicate, you're in a position where you can, near enough every single time, save Robin Hood and, quite often, defeat the Sheriff as well. 5-player, I've not managed to actually win, because it just falls apart. And I think 5 players is that absolute cap where you need everybody to be singing from the same hymn sheet. 4 players, you can almost sit off in pairs and say, you do this, and the plans just sort of, dovetail, cascade together. That 5th player just seems to add all sorts of anarchy. It's like a grenade. It just blows all plans apart and it just falls into absolute anarchy. But it's still fun. And there are some instances where we have been one guard away from rescuing Robin Hood, and we imagine the band is stood there on the hill shaking their fist as Robin Hood is marched off to the gallows by that one bloke who we just couldn't outsmart. With the complexity being possible to beat, there are always those challenge cards that give you points. Now, the rulebook doesn't exactly state how those points work, and for me that is a bit of a downside. I think rescuing Robin Hood, wonderful. Defeating the Sheriff, even better. But I think there should have also been a scale in that you are Grandmaster Archer or whatever. Just something. I know it would have been cute and it would have been a bit fluffy, but I think it would have just given them a little bit more purpose. Saying that, we still use them, we still enjoy them, and we like the fact that there's that risk of we flip over that card and stealth is now -2. All our plans have just fallen apart, we had these cards, but we need to work with it. And I think it's a nice addition. It just could have been executed a tiny bit better in terms of the rules. The rulebook itself is really well done apart from that. It really explains everything, it gives you examples. It's quite user-friendly, I'd say. One of the better rulebooks I've definitely seen. But with that as well, you also get an extra book, which is a full book of all the characters. Doesn't tell you anything about their stats. Doesn't tell you anything about how they'll be used. It is a book full of just lore about these made-up characters, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It is just little snippets of their lives, and because all of their names are just puns or plays on words, like Sir Render. You read his little bit and it turns out he's a knight who always loses or always gives up, but it's just that little bit of comedy, and I think it's all very sweet. The game is designed to be quite captivating in both its theme and its execution, and it does really well. I mean, it's quite a fantastical thing to go off and save Robin Hood from the Sheriff of Nottingham and then to run back off to the Great Oak Tree to have mead with all of your merry band. It's very much an English folktale because that's what it's based off of, but I think they've done a fantastic job of executing that and making it work really well in the game's favour, particularly with those little additions, including in the rulebook where they reference band leaders as the players and such. They've definitely put a lot of thought into it. A lot of thought and a lot of pride has been taken in terms of the aesthetic execution. The artwork, at first I wasn't a fan of. I remember when I did the preview I loved it, and when I looked at it this time I was expecting something a bit more. But when you couple it all into everything else, there's no inconsistency. Everything does have that really arty style, almost where it's just off of... I almost imagine they were stained glass images that have just had the stained glass aesthetic removed, because everything's very blocky, but I think it's beautiful, and I do think it works. It's grown on me very quickly. All of the components work really well. I do personally wish that they had the player boards that are little strips. They are blank on the back. They could have put some art on there. Also with that, they could easily have been, and I know it would have been a big push for a Kickstarter campaign, but dual layered to put those little cubes in. Because there have been a few times where someone has stood up a bit quick and the cubes have just gone everywhere, and then you've got to either recalculate or try and remember where things were. As for replayability, even at different player counts it's got that element of it, because each single set of day 2 cards for day 1, 2, day 3, 4, day 5 for a 2-player game has a little bit of a twist, and it gives you an edge. It says all band leaders gain +2 strength on the first 2 days, but then a different set might say something else, and I think it keeps things quite spicy. Also with that, you've got so many different guard layouts that you could possibly get. You've got so many different starting villagers that you could get. You've also got no end of villagers to rescue, that every game always feels very unique. It's always the same style and the same concepts. You know, you and your merry band are going to go fight some guards, try and outwit them, try and stealth them, try and outbrute them, have a merry old time just to try and save Robin Hood. But it never feels like you're playing the same game twice, which means no commonised tactic will always work. So who's it for? I'd say it's quite a good game for families. I wouldn't say it's for big groups of gamers because of that alpha gamer element, but for families I think it's perfect. It's got really lovely artwork, it's got that really old schooly folktale style to it, little nuances, little elements where it's quite cute, where you can almost say, oh, I remember this character, he's my favourite character because he's got a sword and he's got all these elements, and it's a game that you can become quite attached to, and it'd almost be quite a nice sit down as a family and play together as opposed to against each other sort of game. I've really enjoyed my time reviewing Rescuing Robin Hood, and I'm incredibly grateful for Castillo Games to Castillo Games for sending me this review copy. If you are looking for that next family cooperative game, looking for something a bit different, looking for one where you've really got to take the challenge, looking for one that's got a lot of pride taken in it, where they have really taken the time to produce such a lovely game that's cooperative, this game's for you. If you're not one for cooperation, if you've got a fear of alpha gamers, or if Robin Hood folktales aren't your thing, probably not for you. As always, thank you ever so much for sticking around for this long. I will catch you next time.